Hey everyone, welcome. Today we're jumping right into this explainer on the Falkland Islands. Now, whether you know them for their complex geopolitics, their super rugged geography, or, their really unique animal residents, there is just a ton of fascinating stuff to unpack about this remote little marvel in the South Atlantic. Let's get right into it. Here's our agenda for today. We'll start with a remote Atlantic marvel, move on to the 1982 Falklands War, then cover governance and sovereignty, and wrap up with economy, sheep, and tourism. Section 1, a remote Atlantic marvel. Okay, to really wrap our heads around the Falklands, which, by the way, are also known as the Malvinas, we absolutely have to look at this crazy geographical paradox they've got going on. Just look at this. They sit a mere 500 kilometers off the coast of Argentina, right? But somehow they are a staggering 12,000 kilometers away from the UK. That massive distance from Britain, contrasted with how close they are to South America, well, it pretty much sets the stage for everything else we're going to talk about today. And when you zoom in on the map, you realize we aren't just talking about one or two lonely islands here. The Falklands are actually this sprawling archipelago made up of 778 individual islands, just scattered out there in the deep, freezing Atlantic. It's kind of like a giant puzzle. But here's the kicker. Despite all those hundreds of islands and the sheer area they cover, things are actually super concentrated when it comes to where people live. The administrative heart of the entire territory is almost entirely focused in one single, small capital city called Stanley. Section 2, the 1982 Falklands War. So, that intense geographical isolation we just looked at, it eventually became the backdrop for a very modern conflict. On April 2nd, 1982, Argentine forces actually invaded the islands. This kicked off a really severe military conflict that lasted exactly 74 days, right up until June 14th, when the UK officially regained control of the territory. And it's incredibly important to remember that this sovereignty dispute carried a heavy human cost. Over those 74 days of fighting, roughly 900 lives were lost across both sides. It was a relatively brief war, sure, but an incredibly impactful one that forever changed how this territory is viewed on the global stage. Section 3. Governance and sovereignty. So, in the direct aftermath of that historic conflict, how exactly are the islands governed today? Well, they operate as what's called a British Overseas Territory. It's a pretty unique setup, honestly. The territory falls under the sovereignty of the UK, with a British monarch as their head of state, but the actual day-to-day power is split up in a very specific way. It essentially breaks down like this. On one side, you've got internal self-governance. That basically means the locals are autonomously in charge of their own daily affairs, passing their own local laws and running their internal economy. But then on the flip side, you have external support. The British government and military step in to handle all international diplomacy and, of course, defense. So it's this dual-layered system, letting the locals run their lives while the UK provides a protective umbrella. Section 4. Economy, sheep, and tourism. Okay, let's leave the geopolitics behind for a second and look at what life is actually like on the ground today. The demographics here are just wild. You have this tiny human population of about 3,000 residents, and they are sharing these islands with roughly 500,000 sheep. Literally, 500,000. That ratio is absolutely incredible, and as you'd probably guess, having that many sheep heavily dictates the local way of life. Because of those unique demographics, their economy is, well, very distinct. The traditional backbone has always been sheep farming and wool production, but they've definitely evolved over the years. Since 1987, selling commercial fishing licenses has turned into a massive, super lucrative revenue stream. And on top of that, they've got a booming ecotourism industry. People are traveling all the way down to these remote islands specifically to see the native penguins, which, let's be honest, is pretty awesome. But there is a massive shift happening right now. Deep underground, beneath all that rugged, sheep-filled landscape, they've started exploring for oil. International companies are out there right now probing the region, which introduces a highly valuable and honestly potentially game-changing new resource to the island's entire economic portfolio. So I want to leave you with this to think about. As these quiet, isolated islands start discovering these massive potential oil reserves, how might that newfound wealth alter the really delicate geopolitical balance we were just talking about? It's a fascinating question, right? Anyway, thanks so much for joining me for this explainer on the Falkland Islands. And as always, keep questioning the world around you.